Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be in Vilnius. Today, it's a special pleasure to be with all of you in person after these 2 years of COVID. It's really nice to be, to socialize again. And of course, thank you to to the organizational team of our ECaRoM project. Today with Erika, we will present insights from our ECaRoM transnational report. Basically, we divided our work today. And of course, before we go to the content part, let me also say that transnational report was prepared in a team together with Antonio Di Grigoli and Majda Hržanjak, who are unfortunately not with us today, but this is, of course, our common and shared work, based on, of course, national reports with the contribution of all our ECaRoM partners. So, from here. Yeah, okay. So what we did in ECaRoM project, in the first phase, we reviewed early childhood education policy documents, existing research, and didactical tools. So each partner selected the main and analyzed the main ECEC policy documents or any other relevant documents for pedagogues. Then each partner also selected 3 to 5 national studies about gender-sensitive education, tackling gender stereotypes related to boys, men, masculinities, and care, of course, in early childhood education. And also we checked recent projects in our national context, which aim at overcoming gender stereotypes in early childhood education, developed, as I said, by national authorities or NGOs. In the next stage of this research part, we also did qualitative research based on in-depth interviews with educators of ECEC services, teachers of primary schools, and experts in the field of gender-sensitive education. We also did focus groups interviews with policymakers, scholars, and experts who deal with gender-sensitive research and specifically with caring masculinities, aimed at early childhood, as well as educators and teachers. And we also used checklists to collect further data, and this part will later on present Erika. So, about the review of policy documents, we found out that legislation and policy documents address issues relating to gender and gender equality, diversity in care in a quite general way without providing specific guidelines. Therefore, the commitment in many cases depend on individual teacher, individual interest of this teacher, and engagement on how to deal with equality, gender equality, and gender stereotypes in their work with children. Topics of care are included in kindergarten activities, for example, in the context of self-care, getting to know different professions, occupations, activities related to the topics of division of work in the families and households. And also the common denominator in all 6 national reports are that there is a small percentage of men in kindergarten teachers in ECEC, except, as we heard from Daniel, in Germany, specifically in Berlin. Then we also found out that there is a lack of guidelines for gender-sensitive pedagogy related to boys and masculinities and care, with some exceptions in school education in Austria and Germany. If we take a look of the existing research, what we observed that there is a lack of systematic national research about gender stereotypes in general in ECEC. So instead of that, there are many small-scale fragmented research produced within different action projects of EU or financed by EU or diploma, master or PhD studies. What else? Yeah, we also saw that there is a lack of interdisciplinarity in these studies. There is a focus on sociology. When studies are produced within pedagogical discipline, we observed a lack of gender expertise. And where gender expertise is included, there is an evident absence of critical men and masculinity study approach. Also, we observed less studies on ECEC compared to primary or secondary schools because of what we already heard of this too early bias, meaning the general belief that gender stereotypes are not relevant in kindergartens, but only later in the primary schools. So research that focus specifically on masculinities and on the gender stereotypes around boyhood, masculinities and care are almost entirely absent. There are few small-scale research in Slovenia which point that boys can be even more affected by gender stereotypes compared to girls. In Italy, for example, we saw that masculinity is taken into consideration only in adolescence, with a focus on formation of toxic masculinities and gender-based violence. In existing research, the focus is more or less on girls and STEAM skills, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, while masculinities and education, health, and welfare skills are backslidden. And the third point, from my side, so about pedagogical material and didactical tools, we found out that there are, rather than systematic national actions, they're mainly are produced by NGOs within framework of the EU projects. Experts also pointed to the lack of cooperation and networking between NGOs and teachers in kindergartens and schools to transfer the material and good practices. With exception of Austria and Germany, and partly also Germany, there is a lack of systematic learning platforms at national levels for teachers, which would offer collection of material, of didactical support produced in different projects. Most of the material provide information for teachers, while gender-sensitive tools such as toys, picture books, games aimed directly to children are rare. And most of the material is based on a gender binary conception and mostly addresses girls and promotion of STEAM skills, while materials introducing boys to education, health, and welfare professions and skills are less frequent. Other stereotypes about masculinities, so related to body, emotions, invulnerability, health, heteronormativity, competitiveness, and violence are rarely tackled. So we can conclude that there is an obvious need for pedagogical material that deconstructs care as an inherent natural feminine trait and present it, as we already heard it by Daniel's presentation, as a universal human activity. So we need material that would highlight the importance of working with emotions, human codependency, empathy, and solidarity. And what we also concluded that the creation of a database or repository of all already existing materials would be necessary and needed. So this would be from my side all at the moment, and I'm passing the floor to Erika.
Thank you, Živa. Good morning, everybody. I will continue the presentation about the next topic, which is gender-sensitive education. So what we have observed, mostly based on our qualitative research, so focus groups and in-depth interviews, is that indeed there has been a progress in the way education is provided to children. And for instance, in the organization of space, in the fact that children, both boys and girls, are offered the same toys, they can do the same kind of activities. For instance, they would be able to play with the home corner or the builder's corner, and there's no gender segregation. Although there are still some gender stereotypes, but indeed in the last years, a progress has been made. And I would like to read a quotation from an educator from Slovenia saying, role playing is very common and children, both girls and boys, like to dress up, wear masks, decorate. They also like to dress up as the opposite sex. Through body and body work, they dispel gender stereotypes of what isn't appropriate for boys and girls. However, notwithstanding this progress, we still have a number of gaps. First of all, we observe that there is not enough gender-sensitive material which is available for educators and teachers. And this is one of the main reasons why within this project we produce this kind of material, which will be shown in a while. As Živa said, there is a general lack of focus on masculinities, and this goes back to the old idea that gender is something, it's a dimension linked exclusively to women. Then another area in which we observed quite a few stereotypes is the area of occupation and profession, which is key in this project. And this is an area in which stereotypes emerge because professions are presented to kids in a rather stereotypical way. And there is also a lack of gender-sensitive language. In terms of gender stereotypes by teachers, educators, and by children, the general idea is that teachers and educators perceive themselves as not having gender stereotypes, at least not explicit gender stereotypes. However, they also recognize the importance of doing self-reflection work. And this is why within the project, we produced some checklists that would list a number of dimensions to reflect on their own behavior, which were considered useful. Concerning the relevance of gender stereotypes, there is a general, for children, there is a general understanding that these are less pronounced in the, until the age of 3. Whereas from the age of 4, they start to become visible, and even more so in primary school. Here is a quotation from a teacher in Germany saying, in the children, the doing gender can be seen, among other things, in the way they dress, in negotiating conflicts, in being in gender homogeneous groups, in sanctioning deviant behavior from gender norms, in occupational orientations, and in caring practices. The normative pressures on boys not to behave in a feminine way is already perceptible in early education and upbringing. Then comes the issue of men in early childhood education and care services. As it has already been said, in all partner countries, these are a minority, and therefore a need is expressed to raise their presence. So why is this so? Well, there are many reasons. One of the reasons is the fact that this is still a job which has an economic and social status which is low. And although we know that the model of the male breadwinner is in crisis, this still has a hold on men's minds. And so this is something which prevents a number of men to undertake this kind of position. However, on the other hand, we also observe that in some situations, the demand for male educators can produce a counter stereotype, both in terms of social and salary recognition, which poses ethical questions. Here is again a quote from an educator in Germany saying, "They offer me so much right away that I immediately earned much more than everyone else, because they absolutely wanted to keep me as the only man, which I found unfair to the others." So that's one of the ethical questions which arises when it comes to raising the presence of men in early childhood education. Other kinds of controversies are that if on the one hand, for sure, an increased presence of men can convey the message two children, that men too can perform care, it's not automatic that their presence equate to a measure to counter gender stereotypes. This happens, for instance, when like a man educator comes in an all-female kindergarten, and then they say, oh, fantastic, the man has come so he can play football with the children. He can take the children out for sport activities, this kind of remarks. So in this case, the message is the opposite. And so this is why we need to be continuously reflective, even when we want to introduce measures that we think are going towards gender equality. And then this can also lead somehow to a devaluation of female professional who have been doing this work since forever. Now a man comes and all of a sudden is like very much appreciated. Another important issue is the specter of child sexual abuse. This came up rather often in the interviews. There is still a social prejudice against male educators as potential abusers. And this is, of course, linked to the hypersexualization of men in care work. And so this is an issue which needs to be addressed. So in terms of recommendation, we came out with the recommendation that it is important to promote a reflection on the relationship between the presence of male educators versus the contrasting perpetuation of gender stereotypes in education. And to address this issue of the child sexual abuse, there is the need to adopt a clear concept of child protection, which also addresses this issue of the suspicion of sexualized violence by male educators. Then in terms of the presence of men in childhood education, we also observe that fathers are more present, for sure, throughout the countries, but there is still a differentiation with mothers. For instance, when there is an emergency case, it's often the mother who is called and not the father. So another area is that of training. And we recommended in the report that caring masculinity and gender sensitive pedagogy become part of the systematic training for all educators. Then we also think that it is important to pay attention to a number of areas such as communication skills, ability to involve parents, how to work with gender equality indirectly through play, daily activities, everyday life, and so on. And also how to proactively approach the highly gendered stereotypes images which are present in the media, fairy tales, and so on. And we also think that it's important to provide training courses and materials to parents, potentially before the starting of the activities, so that this can be helpful for them to clear a number of doubts and also to ensure a more cohesive environment for children, sorry. Then final point, how do we raise the importance of care and caring masculinities? We observe that there is a lack of research and guidelines on gender sensitive pedagogy related to boy. Yes, that caring professions and activities are presented in a very stereotypical way, at least in most cases. So stereotypes materials are not discussed. Male carers are invisible. So the final recommendations that that somehow sum up everything is that further efforts should be directed into developing an inclusive gender sensitive education system that involves critical work on men and masculinities, that works also on educational and professional desegregation, and that also takes into account the spectrum of gender realities beyond gender binarism. And yes, that I think can sum up our work. Thank you.